All right, so I'm gonna do 4.3, and then I'm gonna upload this video, and then I'm gonna try to go back and do 4.2 and 4.1 since those never uploaded from Zoom. So the first thing, it's the chain rule. So the best formula to use, and they give you in this textbook, is that dy dx is equal to the derivative with respect to x of f of g of x, which is a composite function. And so that's going to be equal to f prime of g of x times g prime. Of course, both of these derivatives have to exist. So in other words, we use f of x as your outside function, g of x is your inside function. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that when I do number 2. And also number 8, I believe, is one that I have to do that. So in this one for number 2, what they're asking us to find is they're asking us to find f of g of x, of g of negative 5. So the inside function is going to be g of x. And I'm going to find the value of the function g when x is equal to negative 5. So then that's going to be 8 times 5 plus 3. So 8 times 5 is 40, and then I'm going to have here is going to be 43, right? And so, oops, it's actually negative 5, so that's going to give me a negative 37. Let me fix that real quick. And so then I take, the easiest thing to do is to take the value, since g of negative 5 is equal to negative 7, then the easiest thing to do is just go ahead and replace the g of negative 5 with negative 37 because they are both equivalent. And so then this becomes 5 times negative 37 squared minus 2 times negative 37. And then you end up with a value of 6,919. So that's probably the easiest thing to do to answer a question like number 2. Now here again, we have the same thing, but we have g of f of negative 5. So the first thing that we need to do is find f of negative 5. And so it's going to be 5 times negative 5 to the second power minus 2 times negative 5, which is 5 times 25 plus 10. And that's going to give us 135. So then f of negative 5 is 135. So then what I do is I just replace this with my 135, and then I go ahead and evaluate the value of the function. And so in this case here, actually for number 4, when we do that, we get the value of 1,083. So that's how you do those. Probably the easiest way to do it. And there's a similar way that I do this formula here to get it, and you'll see it when I go ahead and do that next. So the next one here is g of f of x and f of g of x, which is very similar to what we did in the previous ones, but here there's no value of x. We just go ahead and creating a new function. So we can even say that h of x is equal to g of f of x because it's going to be a new function, right? And then we can say something like s of x is equal to f of g of x. And so you're going to see how that works. So g is the outside function, f is the inside function. So I'm going to replace the variable wherever it's in g with the value or the function that's f. And so then I can kind of clean it up a little bit. So I need to have the same denominator. So I'm just going to multiply the 4 by 5 over 5. So that gives me 20 over 5. So then I end up with negative 8x plus 29 over 5, which is a completely new function. And then so if we can call it, we'll just call it h of x, if you will. So the next one is f of g of x. So f is the outside function. So here's my outside function. And I'm going to replace that with g of x, which is my inside function. And so now I just go ahead and distribute the negative 8, right? So that's going to be negative 2 plus 9. And so what I want to do next here is I just want to go ahead and kind of clean this up a little bit. And so it's going to be negative 8x over 5 minus 23, right? And so then if I do the same thing that I did in the previous one, I'm going to get negative 115 over 5, which then becomes the following, right? And so our example, this would be theoretically s of x, if you will. Oops, let me do that. Let's get that back. All right, so for number 16, what they're asking us to do is to find an inside function and outside function, right? So write the composition, each function as a composition of two separate functions. So the easiest thing to do is always to use f of x as the outside function, and that's going to be x raised to the 2/3, right? And then I can make g of x my inside function, which will be 3x squared minus 7. And so if you think about this, I can say, well, this is equal to f of g of x, right? Given the functions that I use, the composition, the two functions to compose the y that they gave us. All right, so that's number 16. They're different answers, so it's just not one answer for that one. So for number 22 is they're asking us to find the derivative. So I'm going to find y prime. So just to give you an idea, so y prime is going to be equal to f prime of g of x times g prime of x. So then, just like I did here, I'm going to find an outside function and the inside function. I'm going to define what f of x is, and I'm going to define for what f of x here as x to the 5th power. And I'm going to define g of x as my inside function, which is 2x to the 3rd power plus 9x. Now I have to find f prime. And so by the power rule, f prime will just be equal to 5x to the 4th power. Now g prime of x is going to be the same thing, right? So that's going to be 6x squared plus 9. So that's my g prime. So now we have defined f prime, we have defined g prime. So now we're going to go ahead and finish it off using the formula that I wrote right over here. I use this formula. So y prime is equal to f prime of g of x. So it's going to be 5 times 2x to the 3rd plus 9x raised to the 4th power, and then I'm going to go ahead and use g prime, which is my 6x squared plus 9. And so in this case here, this is my y prime given my y. So you can see that if I break it down in these steps, it makes life a little easier, just plugging in the values into that. So again, here I have s of t. So I'm going to define f of t as my outside function. I'm going to put the 12 there, but I'm going to end up leaving it out when I put everything together and then multiplying it after the fact. So f of t, oops, I wrote an x. It's such a habit. And then I'm going to define g of t, and g of t is going to be 2t to the 4th plus 5. Now, g prime of t is going to be 12, and I'm going to do it this way, and then 3 over 2t raised to the 1/2. So just remember that the derivative is just going to be n, and then times the variable, and then raised to n minus 1, right? And so now I define g prime of t, and g prime of t is going to be 8t to the 3rd power, right? And so remember again the formula. So s prime of t is going to be s prime of t is going to be f prime of g of t times g prime of t. And so s prime of t is going to be 12. Here's my 12, right? And then 3 over 2, 2t to the 4 plus 5 raised to the 1/2 times g prime, which is 8t to the 3rd. And so what I can do with this one is I can actually kind of combine it. And so it's going to be 144 t to the 3rd, and then it's going to be 2t to the 4th plus 5 raised to the 1/2. And so that becomes your derivative. And all I did was just kind of combine those two. I didn't do it in the earlier one, but this one I went ahead and did that. Now, for number 30, you're going to have to do the product rule, and then you're also going to have to do the chain rule. So it's going to be multiple steps here, but let's go ahead and get it started. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to define u of t as being my 4t. Now v of t is going to be my 2t to the 5th plus 3 raised to the 4th power. Now, u prime of t is easy. That's just going to be 4, right? Now, but v of t, I'm going to have to sort of define different functions. So my f of t is going to be x to the 4th, or t to the 4th, sorry, again, bad habit, t to the 4th. And then g of t is just going to be my inside function, right? So 2t to the 5th plus 3. F prime of t is going to be 4t to the 3rd. G prime of t is going to be 10t to the 4th, right? So then v prime of t is going to be 4 times 2t to the 5th plus 3 raised to the 3rd times 10t to the 4th. I'm going to clean it up, so it's going to be 40t to the 4th, 2t to the 5th plus 3 to the 3rd power. All right, so that's going to be my v prime. So I had to do the chain rule in order to find that. Now I'm going to use that information to go ahead and get my last value, my last function, which is r prime of t. So then if you remember, it's going to be 4t, right, which is my, oops. Yeah, let me write it as f of x. So f of x, f prime of x is going to be u of x times v prime of x plus v of x times u prime of x. And so I have my u. Now I'm going to go ahead and multiply that times my v of my v prime, which is going to be the following. This is going to be, let me make sure I got everything right here. So I got 10 and to the 4 plus 3, yeah. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and multiply. So this is going to be 40 t to the 4th, 2t to the 3rd, plus 3 raised to the 3rd power. And then I have my, and that's it, yeah, for that one. Now this is going to be plus my original function, which is my 2t to the 5th plus 3. And then times my, so that's my v, and then times my u prime, which is just going to be my 4. All right. So now what I can do here is I can actually kind of combine these a little bit. So then I can go ahead and say, all right, so I'm going to make this into, I'm going to just multiply out the 4. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in both of these. So then this is going to be the following. It's going to be 160 t to the 5th, right? And then this is going to stay. So there's going to be 2t to the 3rd, right? Plus this is going to be 8t to the 5th, and then this is going to be plus 12. Now, one of the things that we also could have done is sort of taken out a 2t to the 3rd, but we're going to go ahead and not do that. And so when you finish up, you're going to see that this is your final answer for number 30, step by step. And so let me just make sure that we got everything right here. So u is going to be 4t, v is going to be 2t 5th, and then we define f of t, f prime of t, g of t, and then g prime of t. We define those. All right, and so we can actually take, if you will, we can take values out to kind of clean up this one, but we can leave it as that. All right, so here again, we're going to define u of x or u of t, sorry, as 2t plus 3 raised to the third power. V of t is going to be 4t squared minus 1. Now v prime of t is going to be 8t. U prime of t, and just so you can know that this is actually an easy way of doing it, we know that we're going to bring the exponent down, right? So that's going to be the outside function, and then the inside function is just going to be the derivative of the inside function, which will give me 6 times 2t plus 3 to the second power. So you can actually do that without having to write everything down once you get comfortable. So we know that p prime of t is going to be equal to 4t squared minus 1. And then, of course, we're going to go ahead and do v, right, which is 4t squared minus 1 times u prime, which is going to be, so it's going to be 6 times 2t plus 3 to the second power minus my u, which is 2t plus 3 to the third, times my v prime, which is 8t. And so what happens here for number 38 is that when you combine sort of everything together, and you can if you want to do that, right? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take out a 2t plus 3 to the third power. So I'm going to take out a 2t plus 3 to the second power, sorry. Right? And then what's going to be left inside is going to be the following, right? So if I do the 6, let me do it this way so you guys can see it before I do that. Here's my 6 minus 8t. All over, that's going to be squared. 4t squared minus 1 to the second power, right? And so if I multiply those out, I'm going to leave this one here. And then I can just do the following, right? So, of course, 6 times 4 is going to be my 24t to the second power minus 6 minus 8t. And then, of course, I got 4t squared minus 1 to the second power. So since we're not doing the test, we're not doing those word problems, I'm going to skip 53 and 54. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the computational ones. I'll go ahead and upload this video, and then I'm going to go back and do 4.2 and 4.1, and then continue to work moving